Quinn Varcoe, the SOC specialist, is joining me in the studio. She's just off of a cross-country flight, a little jet lag, but she still took the time out of her day to talk with us. You have had a storied history in the SOC industry. You've been an analyst, a SOC analyst, a SOC manager, a SOC engineer, lots of titles after the SOC term. So tell me like a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm one of the rare few people who entered the cybersecurity industry with no background. I mean, besides just growing up and touching some stuff, I had no background in cybersecurity. I had like no experience, degrees, or certifications. I came in at 18, started off as an analyst, worked night shift, worked my way up to engineer. Finally got back in front of people after like 1.5 years. And then I started working at a whole bunch of different places that are more well known. I was on a contract for Medicare and Medicaid, and then I went to CVS Health, and then I started helping this startup company do SOC. And so that's when I started kind of managing and designing SOCs, and I actually built 2 SOCs in like 6 months, pretty much from scratch. I came in, they were both completely leveled, and we rebuilt them. And then and I'm here. And then I after I did it a few times myself, I was like, you know what, I'm just going to start my own business.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of wanted to touch on first is you've been a few different positions, like every position there is in the SOC. You know, it's not like 30 different jobs really in the SOC. There's only like a handful, and you've done all of them or most of them, and have worked at some different places, which I'm guessing gave you a lot of different experience, like different threat styles, different threats coming in, how to figure out what they are in different environments, how to triage them, how to respond. And now you're basically an entrepreneur startup yourself. So tell me a little bit about Blueberry Security.
Yeah, so we started in November of 2024. No idea what we were going to do. It was kind of just me and my business partner, and it was just like, yeah, we should start a business. Let's try to figure it out. And it took us about like 8 months to figure out like a marketing strategy, and how are we going to sell our products or our services. And so we eventually figured that out, and that's about when I met you. We kicked off a marketing campaign that generated like 1.5 million views within like 3 months, which was pretty good.
Yeah.
And then and then I hired a sales director and stopped doing LinkedIn thought leadership, and then I started kind of serving the clients that we met in those few months.
The successful business owners delegate early. So congratulations. It looks like you're going places.
Thanks.
And I was going to say a lot of the audience for this will be like MSP owners, employees, and a lot of MSPs get started like an accidental entrepreneur. They're like, I know how to do this stuff. I'm doing it for other people. I feel like I could make a bigger impact if I just did it myself, like ran the whole show. And it sounds like you had a very similar journey.
Yeah, so for me, I have just always been the type of person who wants to start their own business. And after I've been doing this for a few years now, and I'm like, okay, I know what everybody's doing wrong. I'm just going to go in there and I'm going to do it myself, and I'm going to do it right. And I think it's mostly worked. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about how it worked and doing it right. So you designed a few SOCs. And honestly, I know very little about SOCs other than what I've seen on like movies. And based on our brief LinkedIn chat, you're like, it is kind of like that. So
yeah, it can
tell
be.
me like what is a SOC? What's the mission of a SOC?
Yeah, so SOC means Cybersecurity Operations Center. A lot of companies will call them a CSOC instead of a SOC. Essentially, what it is a monitoring center where we monitor logs from applications all over the organization. We ingest them into a monitoring tool called a SIM, And then from there, we create threat detection rules to detect if somebody's trying to hack a company. Um, to simplify it as much as I can. The SOC usually is not responsible for the incident response process, but the exciting and the adrenaline rush stuff, the really awesome um, stuff that's in movies, that is kind of in a SOC, or at least the SOC hands off to the IR team. Um, for us, that's the case. There's two separate teams. Um, yeah, so the incident response team essentially will receive an alert that something bad happened, and then they'll go and investigate, and they'll have to create the story of, who, what, when, where, why, what was the crime, and can we stop it live, or did we lose something, what did we lose, and how can we best recover.
Yeah. How do we stop the bleeding and how do we make it not happen again?
Mm-hmm.
So when you're, designing a SOC, you mentioned SIM and alerts. Does like when in that designing process is like the alerting a really big factor? I would imagine so.
So yes and no. So I think the most common mistake that people make is that they try to turn on as many alerts as possible, and it creates a lot of noise and causes analysts to miss things. It's more important that the alerts are like very high value but low amount. That's how you get the most out of your system, because at the end of the day, your sim and your analysts are not going to detect a hacker every single day. It's going to be like once ever, maybe twice ever, and which is crazy that we design systems like this to prevent one crime. But it saves millions of dollars if it's done right. Anyways, it should save you millions of dollars.
What is an example of a high value alert in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think alerts that are lower priority should be turned on to reduce risk, and alerts that are higher priority should be turned on to catch bigger incidents. So a low priority alert would be a network detection using your IDS, and it says something like clear text credentials detected. It's maybe not the super highest priority, but
It's like
somewhere on your
a bad
network,
guy
something's not secure.
poking at the network, basically.
It's it's a misconfiguration. So nobody's broken in yet, but it's something easy that a bad guy could find. And so finding those things early in your SOC is something that sets your SOC apart. So it's proactive versus reactive versus both at the same time.
That's really interesting because so at DNS filter, we block DNS queries and more things in the near future like URLs and IPs and all this stuff. And a lot of times what we tell people to do when they first get our software is to like turn it on, deploy it, but don't block anything yet. Just kind of see what comes in so that you can craft a policy and alerts that are more beneficial. So it sounds like you're taking a very similar approach, and the employees, whoever is doing the work is going to be providing you with those different levels of alerting. So like you can use them, like guinea pig yourselves, to figure out those easy things to cut off essentially.
Yeah, that's very true. So once we observe an environment, it's easy to see more of what the threat landscape is, which I think sounds like a funny word, and it's more of a buzzword. But the more stuff that you have in your organization, the easier it is to have a larger surface for attackers to attack. And you're right, that's the purpose. Is once we know what's in an environment, then we can make better decisions.
So I don't know if you mentioned a high value alert in your opinion. What would one of those look like?
Yeah, and so here's a good example that I think would be really easy for you to understand as well. If we get a DNS callback for a malicious domain, let's say it's a domain associated with the ransomware group, that is surely not a good thing that will ever happen. Even if it's blocked, it means that you're compromised. So that would be a high priority alert that is high value, and would really easily engage the IR team to come in and do their incident response. When did we get breached? How far did the infection spread?
That's a great example. Like, you please use DNS as an example anytime. It's always DNS, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the structural roles in a SOC? Like I know you've been an analyst, an engineer, a designer, a SOC manager. Are there other roles that people could kind of kind of craft the path of their career towards?
So it really depends on the size of the organization and how their security team has been designed. But typically there's analyst, engineer, um, architect, manager, and then you have incident response. You have team leads, your technical team leads on the incident response team, on the SOC team, and then you have your threat intelligence team, which is generating new content for your team. They essentially do research on what are adversaries looking to do to your organization, and so threat intelligence is actually super super cool because you have to like go undercover and like pretend to be a bad guy and steal data from them.
I was just about to ask you which was your favorite. It sounds like the threat hunting is really where you like.
I actually really like being an incident commander, which is the people who run the incidents. They're the ones in charge of organizing the staff to contain an incident. I think I'm a fan of the threat intelligence role, but it's not something that I have done. I'm sure I could do it well if I ever do it, but just at this point, I'm not going back to work it.
Yeah, that's a whole different trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
Totally understand that. Um, let's talk about some of the tools that you would use in a SOC. Like, what are some of the software packages that are pretty common that you see?
Yeah, so I would say that one of the most important things that every organization has is an EDR tool like CrowdStrike, Defender for Endpoint, Sentinel One, just to name a few. Um, so those are some of the tools. There's also the IDS IPS. So you'll hear about Suricata and Zeek, Corelight. Um, you'll probably hear about different SIM options like Splunk, um, Microsoft Sentinel, um, Google Chronicle, Logarithm, and then there's like open source. There's so many different types of SIMs. Our company, we actually focus on open source because we want to reduce costs, and there are free tools that do pretty much everything better than the proprietary tools. There's a very big misconception in this industry, and I guess in pretty much every
The
industry,
world.
that the misconception is that uh, because it's proprietary, it's safer, and that's not true. Open source is safer, and so I try to use open source tools as much as possible.
Yeah, so you're saying there's EDR tools and other tools that are emitting data. There's a
Mm-hmm.
SIM that's catching the data, and that's where like the alerts are kind of crafted in that SIM. So the SIM kind of seems like the central point.
Yeah, so the SIM's the central point. It's where all the logs go. It's where the detections are made. The tools that feed into that: IDS, EDR.
It's funny that you mentioned open source because, and I didn't give you
Mm-hmm.
these questions, but next question on my list is what is the role of open source in cybersecurity? Because like you, I believe that the open source should be our first thing, our first tool that we grab. Just not because, well, just because they're better. And I'm not saying they are better right now, but I feel like they should be better. And
They're more
even now,
customizable.
exactly. And even now, they are better in some instances. So it's great to see you guys are kind of focusing on open source SIM tools. Are you also recommending open source EDRs? Because I do know those exist as well.
The way our model works is we will always recommend an open source tool first. The other thing that we do is we try to integrate with whatever customers already have. Let's say they, for whatever reason they're a fan of CrowdStrike. Our model is we're going to set everything up in their environment so they can have it if they don't want to work with us. It's all open source. it'll save them money. They can scale it as quickly as they want, and it's all theirs.
So, what is Blueberry's role in the SOC ecosystem? Are you guys kind of contracted to be the monitoring arm and the kind of setup and consulting?
So we're more focused on consulting. So people will come to me and say, "Hey, I have 3,000 endpoints that I need to set up a SOC to monitor this. Does it make sense to bring it in house? And if so, how would you do it?" Um, that's part of it. We also staff those SOCs if they would prefer to work with a contracting company. We can hire people at Blueberry to work there um, to reduce some of the risk of hiring new people. And then we also do SOC as a service. So some of those clients may determine after they've done consulting that they don't want to bring it internal and they want to do SOC as a service. And then that's when we have those discussions, kind of more of if they cannot afford to do it themselves, then we have that open.
So you're almost a managed service provider in that way, a little bit.
Yeah, in some ways.
Do you have any managed service providers as customers?
Yeah, so actually, like the majority of our work is done through partners. So usually, like virtual CISOs or MSPs, maybe they don't want to do the SOC as a service component, but they want to work with a consultant who does SOC, or they need a recommendation for a SOC as a service provider, and that's when we work with them.
Very cool. That's good to know for the audience. If you're looking for consulting and SOC help, Quinn is your gal. And also, I was curious. So threats are coming in all day. Some of them are low value, as you said. Some of them are high value. How do you, as a SOC entrepreneur, I guess would be a good word. How do you kind of stay up on the threat landscape? Like what's coming in, what is important to know about, what is meaningless and can be ignored?
So for me, I try to hire really good people who stay on top of those things. So I guess there's two ways to look at this question. One is, how does the organization as a whole generate detections that fight active threats, and that's going to be done through like your threat detection and threat intelligence team. So the way it works for us is we have somebody who's doing that threat intelligence research, and they're working to turn those into alerts. But for the other part of the question, and this might be more of what you meant, how do you stay on top of current cyber threats in terms of like reading the news, staying up to date? So like I said, the people I hired, very intelligent. They read the news all the time. I tend to view what comes up in my LinkedIn feed a lot. But there's also tons and tons and tons of different news sources, especially for the purpose of threat intelligence. A lot of people will use like Feedly.
Yeah, it's challenging to stay on top of all the things that's coming in. It's definitely like we at DNS Filter, we have a whole labs team, and all they do is figure out what is the new thing that came out today or this morning or the last 5 minutes. Luckily, our data gives us a bit of some clues about malicious domains that are happening in real time. So that's very cool. It's hard to stay up on. It's good to have a team behind you doing that. What are I think I've heard you talk about this before, but like you've had a good bit of experience in various roles in the SOC, and now you are an entrepreneur in the space. What do you think is the best strategy for someone else to kind of break into the cyber industry and potentially be an entrepreneur of some sort in the future?
Don't give up. I think that's the biggest one. So I broke into the cybersecurity at 18 with no degree, experience, or certification. And the way I did that was I just walked into like office buildings and I was like, "Can I work here? I'll do anything. I'll do an unpaid internship." Like I was just begging people for work. And actually, like literally the first place that I walked into, they said, so I walked in my first place and the CEO came out and I shook his hand. I didn't know it was the CEO. And I was like, is there somebody I can talk to about a job? Like, I'll do anything for an unpaid internship.
He's
And he
like
goes,
me.
yeah. Well, and he goes, well, we don't do unpaid internships, but we'll interview you for a full-time position. And I didn't know what a SOC was. So I walked into that interview. I did terrible on the interview. I had no idea what I was interviewing for. But they had somebody who got food poisoning who worked a night shift. And so he was like not able to work, which came in perfect for me because they wanted to have redundancy on night shift and they needed somebody to start immediately. And that was me.
You're like, well, I could start right now.
Yeah.
You're hired. That's awesome. So you tenacity, I would say, is what got you in. And so I was actually thinking like, what about like certs versus college? And it sounds like those don't matter. Like that doesn't matter. What matters is
Skill.
persistence
Yeah.
and skills.
So I think that like initially getting my foot in the door, and I'll tell this to everybody, like you're getting your foot in the door, you just need like your security plus, and then you need to go beg for a job because that's, it's just like cold calling someone. Maybe you'll get a 1% response rate, but eventually you'll find somebody who will take you on. As far as like technical stuff, I think degree is not important. I think college degrees are often ignored, at least in this specifically in SOCs, in incident response. Certifications too, but there's a few like very well respected ones like the GCIH from SANS, the incident handler certification. That one's good. I have a ton of certifications with SANS because I ended up going back to college at SANS to get certifications. It was kind of like, easier that way. But I think don't focus too much on certifications and focus on skill. That's more important.
How do you? How would you recommend showcasing that skill?
So I would. So on my resume, I still have a one-page resume. I tell everybody make a one-page resume, and literally it should be just your experience. And then if you have some stuff you've done that's not on your job history, then you should make like a project section where you can talk about like projects you did to gain that experience or projects you did that showcase very specifically like what makes you a good fit for the new job that you're looking for.
Do you have any type of like home lab or any type of? Do you do any like testing or like on cloud
Yeah. So
servers?
so well so originally when I was getting into this stuff, I had a big home lab. I had like a malware lab, and then I had like a separate network to detonate malware on, and I had like a whole bunch of crazy stuff. I don't have that anymore because I moved and I wanted to thin my equipment. So we actually now at Blueberry Security we actually have like a testing subnet where we actually have all the same stuff available and it's all virtualized, which is really nice because all of my employees can touch it as well and they can play with it and set up new things and mess around and see what works.
Yeah, so you still have it, but you don't have to maintain it, which is way better.
Yeah,
You're like, oh, blew up the lab. Sorry, guys. Somebody go fix that.
yeah.
Somebody wipe that subnet. Let's make a new one. That's very cool. So now you're like the accidental entrepreneur, and you had mentioned that you had been on this big marketing push. What do you think has been like the most difficult thing, kind of starting your own business?
Um, the most difficult thing is having enough money to start your own business. It is incredibly expensive, and like I mean, everybody says that, but like the amount of like costs I did not expect that came up last minute, and it's like, oh my god, I have to spend more money. I don't have any more. Um, like that just keeps happening. Um, so consider getting an investor early if that's the way you want to go, or try to not necessarily write out a business plan. So I didn't write a business plan; I just started doing it, and I think that's better. But try to budget and track your spending. And just because something seems like a good idea at that time, don't forget that you can always drop it later. And like, do not spend money just because you decided too early, or you can always stop that service.
Yeah, like the sunk cost fallacy. Like, oh, I thought Google Ads was going to be the thing, except now I'm $5,000 deep and I've got one lead or whatever. So I'm just, cut it off. It's fine. Just say failure. Like, no, next.
Yeah.
Just like you would in, network security. You'd be like, no, that was wrong. Let's do something else.
Well, and I think something important too is that when you start looking into marketing, you need to look at the cost per lead, and that's the only thing that matters. How much money am I spending to generate one customer? And then, of course, your question is, how big is that customer and how much money will I make from them? But the reality is that like Google Ads was not a good fit for me, but thought leadership was, because thought leadership was, not only was it free, but I was really good at it. And I generated like 100 leads from like 10 minutes of work. And that's way better. So it's going to depend on you. But I think in this industry, the two things that I settled on was I built an outbound sales team, and then I also still do thought leadership. I appear on podcasts, try to be visible.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people are like, but I don't want to be on camera. And it's like, well, it's easier than you think. Like, because everyone has an opinion. Like you and I, we both have opinions. And if you just put a camera on us, we'll say something.
Yeah, I agree with that. I am also kind of scared of the camera, but you just got to show up.
One last question. Your first name, Quinn, is Quinlan, and your last name together, Quinn Varcoe, which to me sounds like the perfect supervillain name. So I'm just very surprised that you're on, the white hat hacker side of the game, blue teaming versus being a bad guy. Did that ever strike you? Like your name is like, oh, that should be a bad guy, totally.
That's funny. No, well, so when I got into cybersecurity, I was living in Europe on like doing like foreign exchange in high school, and I was hanging out with like identity thieves, and I kind of just like started getting into cybercrime, and
that's how
everyone
like, gets started in tech. It's like something pretty much illegal.
Well, yeah, so that happened, and I was like, I need to find a way to make sure I'm secure, because there are terrible people out there, and I know some of them.
Exactly. All right, we'll see you on an episode of Darknet Diaries real soon.
Maybe.
Well, thank you for showing up, Quinn, and giving us some kind of details on the SOC. It was very interesting for me to learn, and I hope the audience gets some value as well. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on.